There are some nights that never leave you no matter how many years pass. For Marcus Reed, that night started with nothing more than the sound of his own footsteps echoing through an alley he'd walked for decades. He thought his battles were behind him. The trial that nearly destroyed him was over. The lies that painted him as a monster had been burned to the ground, and the two kids he once rescued from that same alley, now grown powerful and fiercely loyal, had cleared his name. He thought he could finally breathe, but he didn't know someone else had been breathing fire for years, and tonight that bitterness was ready to spill blood. Marcus had gone back to work at the steel plant the moment his charges were dropped. Everyone begged him to take it easy, especially those two kids, Alex and Lily, no longer the shivering, hungry children he'd carried out of the cold 20 years ago, but a sharp attorney and an investigative journalist who'd fought like hell for him in court. "Dad, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," Alex told him one night over dinner. His hands spread over papers showing retirement options. Marcus just chuckled, his voice raspy but steady. "Son, I built my life on this work. I'll walk out of that place when I decide I've earned it." The plant was alive like it always was, hot steel sweat, the thunder of machines that rattled your bones. Some of the younger guys who'd once whispered that Marcus was dangerous now nodded with quiet respect. A few even looked guilty. Gossip still floated through the break room. "Though why's he still here? Shouldn't he just quit while he's ahead?" one man muttered. "Maybe he likes showing Vaughn he's not scared," another replied. Marcus never answered them. He just wiped his brow, pulled on his gloves, and went back to work. The rhythm of the plant gave him peace. After years of being torn apart by rumors and trials, this was his sanctuary. But not everyone had moved on. Miles away, in an office that had once been a throne, Carl Vaughn sat alone, staring out a window at the factory he used to rule like a king. The trial had humiliated him, stripped him bare. His empire was intact, but his name wasn't. His employees whispered. The woman he'd been seeing stopped returning his calls. Even his own family barely spoke to him anymore. And every day, he saw Marcus walking out of that plant with his head high, those two kids by his side, smiling, laughing, proving that the man Carl had tried to crush had not only survived, he'd built something Carl never had. Carl remembered that winter night 2 decades ago. He'd been walking to his car when he saw 2 dirty, freezing kids huddled in that alley. Their eyes met his, pleading, terrified. He'd muttered, "Not my problem," and walked away. He didn't even make it to the end of the block before Marcus had shown up, scooped them up in his arms, and taken them home. That one choice had haunted Carl ever since. His bitterness festered into obsession. Alone in his kitchen with empty whiskey bottles and unpaid bills scattered across the table, he whispered to himself. He took what should have been mine, my legacy, my respect, my family. His hands trembled with rage as he called in a favor from some men he knew wouldn't ask questions. 1 week later, in a smoky dive bar, Carl slid a thick envelope across a sticky table toward 2 men with cold, flat eyes. "He walks home the same way every night," Carl murmured. "Same alley, no cameras. Make it look like a hate crime. No one will trace it back to me." One of the men smirked. Easy money. For the first time in months, Carl smiled. But Carl wasn't the only one planning ahead. Alex and Lily never trusted that their father's enemies would just let him live in peace. They'd seen too much corruption, too much power wielded in shadows. Without Marcus knowing, they hired a discreet security team to follow him home each night, men who blended into the darkness but never let him out of sight. Marcus, of course, thought he was alone that night. He limped out of the factory, lunch pail in hand, cap pulled low against the biting wind. The alley hadn't changed in 20 years. Narrow, damp, flickering neon, reflecting in puddles. He'd walked it so many times it felt like an old friend. But that night, the air felt heavier, like the city was holding its breath. 2 figures stepped out from the shadows, knives glinting under the streetlight. "Evening, old man," one of them sneered. Marcus froze. For a second, he thought they were just looking to mug him, but then the taller one muttered, "This is him. and his stomach dropped. He stumbled backward, the clatter of a kicked can echoing through the alley. "Look," he started, voice shaking. "I don't want trouble." But the man lunged forward, blade raised. That's when it happened. A roar of boots against pavement, a shout. "Drop it!" Two men in plain clothes surged out of the darkness. One slammed the attacker against the wall, the knife skittering across the wet ground. The other took down his partner, twisting his arm behind his back with practiced ease. The alley exploded into chaos. Grunts, curses, the crack of fists meeting bone. Marcus pressed himself against the brick wall, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He could hardly process what was happening. Seconds ago, he was about to die. Now both attackers were face down on the ground, wrists zip-tied, spitting curses. One of them glared up at Marcus and snarled, "It wasn't our idea. Vaughn sent us. Told us to make it look like hate." Marcus's knees buckled. He would have fallen if not for the wall behind him. Carl Vaughn hadn't just tried to destroy his name, he'd tried to erase him. A black SUV screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. Alex was out first, tie-loose face flushed with fury. Lily followed her camera, already recording, eyes blazing. "Dad," Alex said, rushing to Marcus, steadying him. "We couldn't trust him. We weren't about to let you walk alone." Lily stepped closer, her voice sharp as a blade. Vaughn thought he could buy silence again. Tonight, he bought his own downfall. Within minutes, police cruisers flooded the alley lights, flashing red and blue against wet brick. The assassins, now quiet, started spilling everything: bank transfers, instructions, Vaughn's name again and again. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. But this time, Marcus wasn't sitting in the defendant's chair, shackled and vilified. He sat in the gallery, his children on either side. His hands free now rested calmly in his lap. The air buzzed with whispers. "Can you believe Vaughn tried to have him killed? Man's always been rotten." Carl Vaughn shuffled into the courtroom, pale and sweating, but still trying to sneer. "They're lying," he barked, his voice cracking. "This is a setup." But the mountain of evidence crushed his protests. The hired men's confessions played over the speakers. Bank records tied directly to his accounts flashed on the screen. Lily's investigative skills had uncovered years of shady dealings, and Alex's cross-examination cut through every excuse like a scalpel. When the judge read the verdict, "For conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation, and obstruction of justice, you are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison," the courtroom erupted in gasps. Vaughn's face twisted in rage, but his power was gone. Guards grabbed his arms and dragged him toward the door. He turned once, eyes burning into Marcus's. But Marcus didn't flinch. He met that stare with quiet defiance, his children standing tall at his sides. As the heavy doors slammed shut behind Vaughn, silence fell over the room. Alex leaned in close, his voice softer now. "It's over, Dad." Lily squeezed his hand, tears shining in her eyes. "You can finally breathe." Marcus exhaled a long, shuddering breath that felt like it carried 20 years of pain and fear out of his body. He thought about that alley, about two scared children huddled in the cold, and about the bitter man who had walked away from them. In the end, Carl Vaughn had been destroyed by the very bitterness he carried, while one act of kindness had built Marcus a family that stood between him and death itself. They stepped out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. It was warm on Marcus's face, and for the first time in years, he stood a little straighter. His limp was still there, but it wasn't heavy anymore. He wasn't just finishing his life, he was living it, surrounded by a family he'd chosen. But as they walked down the courthouse steps, a murmur spread through the crowd. Some people whispered that Vaughn wouldn't last a year in prison. Others muttered that men like him always found a way out. Marcus didn't join in. He just kept walking, his arm around Lily Alex, close at his side. He'd seen enough of the world to know justice wasn't perfect. But that day, it had been served. Tell me what you think. Was this justice? Or do men like Vaughn always find a way back? Have you ever seen someone's kindness change the course of everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this one moved, you share it with someone who needs to believe that doing the right thing can still change lives.